Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Wednesday, December 17th. Derek VanRiper, Eno Sarris here with you. Trevor May a little under the weather. Hopefully Trevor gets well soon. We have a news-heavy show again today, and maybe a little bit of a how'd your draft go talk later on with Eno. He completed his first paid draft and hold of the season already. How did you do it? How'd you get it done so fast? We'll dig into that in just a little while. I run into a problem.
Degeneracy.
Yeah. Peak degeneracy, I think, is what was happening here. I was just looking at the pick timer in mind. There are several people in my league that are spending less than 1 minute on the clock with a 2-hour pick clock. So
they're prepared and they're ready, and it's December.
Yep. Never stops. It never, ever stops. But we begin today with some news and some rumors. Alex Bregman getting interest from the Diamondbacks. I wanted you to just kind of help me break this down. How real do you think this is? Because I think the implications would be interesting in the sense that the D-backs looked like a team that wasn't going to spend more money this offseason. If this is happening, it's a Ken Kendrick thing. It's coming from the top. And if it's happening, it might also be in part because they don't fully believe in Jordan Lawler, right? There might be some concerns about Lawler and the limited samples he's had in the big leagues. But this seems weird to me, because of the super rumor that's been floating for a long time that Ketel Marte is on the block with that very team-friendly contract that has a bunch of deferred money in it. It just seems very odd to me that the D-backs would trade Ketel Marte for pitching because everybody wants that contract, and then go out and get Bregman for a more expensive deal, almost certainly in terms of present dollar money, even though that would probably have some deferrals in it too. And maybe that's their best path to pitching because there's no one out there they can sign that will cost less than Bregman, but it feels like a lot of energy being expended to maybe keep the team at a similar sort of projection. So how do you see this actually, fitting into the scope of rumors and reports that come up this time of year?
Yeah, in terms of how much they have left compared to last year, they've got maybe 17, 18 million. I think the AAV on Alex Bregman's contract is going to be past that. So that's why I guess there's this idea that they can sell and buy and thread the needle and compete while thinking about the long term. But, it's just weird to me to trade away what I think is might be the best contract in baseball. I mean, Ketel Marte's net present value per year is $14 million a year for another 5 years. I mean, including this next season, and he's going to have a surplus value of something like 80 to 100 million on that deal. That will get you a lot back, and I guess you could say, "Hey, okay, we trade away this 14 million, we replace it with 25 million a year." And probably a lesser player, at least offensively. I just tend to think that these things are not going to happen. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, we can do this if we do this, and if this happens. All those conditionals make, I think every time you add a conditional to your statement, you make it, 30% less likely to happen. I don't know what the number is, but you know what I mean? If you're like, oh, if this happens and this happens and this can happen, then yeah, okay, good luck with that. So I kind of think this is not going to happen. I would just bet it's not going to happen. But we have seen the owner come in and step in and kind of, it almost seems like once a season, and say, I want that to happen, right? Like we saw it with Jordan Montgomery. That didn't work out. We saw it with Corbin Burns. And I like the deal. And
it was an injury thing that didn't work out for the first year because of an injury. So to be
may
determined.
Still be okay, producer Ryan points out that Bregman is a year younger. I would say the superior defensive player, and not a terrible offensive player, and somebody that I've liked. Maybe there's just a question of what the actual number is, because if it's maybe he can convince the owner to keep Ketel and add Bregman if it's a short-term deal with opt-outs like he did with Boston. So that he's not going to get on the hook for a long-term deal and say, hey, let's see how good we can be with Bregman next year. It's still a pretty bad starting rotation. Maybe they could then make a deal Lawler.
Trade Lawler. That was my idea in Discord. Instead of going so hard in this direction. The Dipoto Preller end of the front office aggression meter is not a place you need to live. Even though it can work for them, it doesn't work for everybody. And if your concerns are about Lawler, your best time to trade him is now while he's still young and pre-arb and people can still dream on the potential, right? So I think that makes a lot more sense. Like, the pitcher you'll get for Lawler might not be anywhere near as good as the multiple pitchers you'd get in a blockbuster Ketel Marte deal, but you already brought back Merrill Kelly. You probably still believe in Brandon Pfaadt. You do get Corbin Burns back eventually. So maybe you don't have to go completely over the top, because I don't think a pitcher you'd go over the top for is even available via trade. The teams that would want Ketel Marte are going to give you younger pitching, not front of the line, obvious game 1, game 2 playoff starter types back, right?
Well, I mean, the rumor for Marte was at one point, Shane Baz and Ryan Pepio, which I think would be,
for them, probably a game 2, game 3 starter situation in a world where Burns comes back and is healthy, right? Like that's
But if that
possible,
rumor was out there and didn't happen, then I'm thinking it's not out there anymore. It's not really an offer. And if you're negotiating with the Mariners, what's the best pitcher the Mariners would give you back? And I'm not saying this in terms of like value. I'm talking about the Mariners who want to win next year. What's the best pitcher they feel they could leave off the roster? They're not going to give you Logan Gilbert.
They could probably give you Bryce Miller.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Because they achieved what they did with Bryce Miller not pitching well because he was hurt and missing time because he was hurt, right? So I think when you look at how you got there last year, the contributions you got from Bryce Miller were abnormally low, and you still made it to the ALCS anyway. So I think that's the story you tell yourself.
But without looking at the surplus money and doing this all math-wise, like just off the top of my head, with like a Bryce Miller, Cole Young, and something else, so you replace your second baseman, you get but that doesn't sound to me like $100 million surplus, and it doesn't sound to me like a deal I have to make. Oh, I need to get Bryce Miller and Cole Young for Ketel Marte, who's maybe the best contract in baseball. Like I don't know. I don't see that part happening, but maybe a short-term deal. The way that the reasoning that I liked Bregman was just a very simple math reason, was that at the projected price, which is $170 million over 6 years, you are paying $12 million per win for Bregman, and that's not a terrible number to pay for an above-average player. That's a decent number. It's basically market price, and a 6-year deal is not going to back you into a corner like maybe I'm worried the Kyle Tucker might. So, the newest rumors are that maybe it's only 5 years. I saw an updated projection from somebody that was like, oh, I've updated my free agent projections. Now it's 5 and 140, 150 for Bregman. I like him even more at that. Now it's 5 years. You're not really on the hook at the very end. So, and if it's a 3-year deal with opt-outs and Bregman tries to just, make as much money as he can every year going through it, which could be his deal. He could be into that, where he's like, hey, I just maximize the money I get every year, then I'll end up where I want to be at the end anyway. Then maybe Kendrick can come in and say, okay, let's just do that. Let's have an offensive-based team. That's how we got to the World Series. It was a team that had, Pfaadt and Kelly on it.
They hit.
There
more.
Was a one quote in Ken Rosenthal's piece that resonated for me, which was that, like, maybe the reason you don't trade Lawler is that there are not a lot of teams right now that want to admit they're rebuilding, in the offseason. And so they're all pretty much trying. So they don't necessarily want to trade a starting pitcher off of their major league roster for a prospect like Jordan Lawler. Jordan Lawler is somewhere in between a prospect and a player. He's in that sort of nebulous region. And I wonder if this is actually a terrible, I would love to maybe see the numbers on this. I wonder if it's a terrible place to trade a guy, is in between being an established player and no longer being a prospect. Because in the card trading world, Jordan Lawler's cards are at a nadir.
Sure. Right.
Because he's neither a prospect that hasn't made it. Like, if you follow cards, like oh my gosh, he's going to debut. Oh my gosh, he's going to debut. Sell that card as soon as he debuts because it's going to go down almost no matter what he does, even if he has a good debut. So anyway, I think the Diamondbacks are a little stuck, and so they're sort of grasping at straws here a little bit. It doesn't make sense for me though, even if you're trying to thread the needle per se to trade Ketel Marte. I would rather say, hey, let's just try to build a good team this year, thinking that actually 2027 is the year that we really want to compete because we get Corbin Burns back.
Just keep the window open, try to hang around in 26, get him back late in the year, see if that's your trade deadline acquisition, air quotes, if you weren't watching on YouTube, and go from there. And then, next year, 2027, you're in good shape then too, potentially. It gives you a chance to get a look at Lawler with lower expectations and see if he's part of that core or not. Like, it's not always the most exciting thing, but standing still is actually an option too. The Mets are not standing still after being critiqued on this show just 2 days ago. Producer Brian has a note here. The Mets are working to finalize a 2-year, $22 million deal with Luke Weaver, according to Joel Sherman of the New York Post. Deal pending a physical. I don't know if the details have been revealed on screens you are looking at yet. I certainly don't have it in front of me. Do you think they are signing him as a reliever, or do you think they would be interested in possibly stretching Luke Weaver out, given some of the concerns we've talked about in that rotation? Even though they've got lots of long-term talent, the how do we get through the full season problem, I think, is very real for the Mets at this present time.
I don't think they're going to do it a second time, only because I think Luke Weaver, the starter, is just as good as a lot of their other options. You know what I mean?
It's more of the same. They did it with Clay Holmes. That's why I thought maybe they see him that way again, since he could.
But since they did that
back
with Clay Holmes, they've added a bunch of young guys. So, would you rather start a bunch of Jonah Tong or Luke Weaver stretching out? I don't know. It seems like
I would choose Jonah Tong.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
yeah,
I think Weaver's in the bullpen. There's a little bit of running back last year's Yankee bullpen.
Yeah. Who else can they get?
Yeah. Right. But I think that Devin Williams, just in terms of strikeouts and walks, was a really big regression candidate, and Luke Weaver, in terms of strikeouts and walks, was also a standout pitcher last year with a 20% strikeout minus walk rate. League average for relievers is like around 16. And, even his top line results were pretty good. So I think Weaver's just setting up Devin Williams. It's the change-up bet that the Yankees made last year that didn't quite work out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Weaver, Devin Williams, and Clay Holmes now all on that roster, but Holmes still theoretically, I think, working as a starter again here in 2026. Some more moves to get to. You called this one. Ha-seong Kim back to Atlanta. 1 year, $20 million. Saw a report that he turned down a 4-year deal to go play in Sacramento. I think his logic here is, hey, $20 million up front compared to 48 over 4. I got a shot at 3 and 28 very easily if I have the bounce back healthy season that I'm expecting to have in Atlanta. So I think he made the right call, given that he got qualifying offer money coming off of a recovering from injury kind of underwhelming campaign in 2025, but fills the clear need you outlined on the show on Monday, where when you looked at Atlanta's depth chart, shortstop was that spot you looked at and said, this is woefully underprojected. They solved it.
Yeah, I do wonder what kind of a deal you offer. Like, he's projected to be basically a league average player by doing league average, defensive value and being exactly average at the plate. Average is this line that baseball seems to care about a little bit more than maybe the WAR or dollars per WAR structure wants to give it credit for. Just players that can be above average or a little bit more on demand. If you're exactly at average and you're aging, he may just be stuck on short-term deals the rest of his career. But can he get the next $28 million on short-term deals? I would think so, because let's say he's a tick below that. He's a 1.5 win player, but was some unlucky in some places, and you think, we move him to second. I feel like you could give him $15 million for a year, off of that, and then I think there's non-zero chance he doesn't ever get the 48.
Yeah, non-zero chance. But if he's healthy, I think because of his defensive versatility and the things he brings to the table, he'll probably get there. And he'll get to choose not playing in Sacramento, which might be more appealing.
That's part of it, too.
That's not a dig at the city of Sacramento. It's the situation that John Fisher put the Athletics in. Let me be clear about that. I have no beef with Sacramento.
And something that's interesting about Korean and Japanese players that I think that we don't appreciate as much is that they always have like one more deal after MLB's done.
Right. They go back
like
to
Masahiro Tanaka did not
stop
stop playing baseball. He just went back to Japan and took some good money over there. So Ha-seong Kim has that one extra deal at least where he comes back to Korea and plays where he played before and does his victory lap there. So maybe that was part of the thinking too, is like, you always have at least, 2-3 million at the very end if you want it. So I like him as a player. It's just, it's an interesting group of skills where like, he's just slightly better at contact than league average. Slightly better. He's better than at patience than league average. Does not hit the ball super hard, but he's not in that group that doesn't hit the ball hard at all. So you always kind of want to dream on him and be like, if he could hit 20 homers, and then you could have this guy who's like a 260, 20-20 guy who's playing shortstop. I mean, that's the dream. That's the way he gets a bigger deal coming out. And that's why you would draft him in fantasy, is that you think he can do those things.
Right now, Kim sits kind of in that pick 250 to 275 pocket. Uncertainty about what lineup he was going to end up in, I think, was part of this. I imagine he can move up a few rounds just because now we know he's got a place where he's a clear starter. He's not a super utility guy or anything like that. That seemed less likely. Anyway, the would you rather
if he goes to the wrong park?
Yeah, like he ends up in a good lineup where he can play every day. Counting stats could be solid. Should get plenty of bags. The power's been the kind of the category that I'm probably the most concerned about. I think that's generally something I don't want to expect a lot in. Maybe it's 10, 12 homers over a full season. The would you rathers in this case come down to like Xander Bogaerts versus.
I think he's actually a pretty similar player to Xander Bogaerts. I would give hit tool to Xander Bogaerts, and so I might take Xander over him.
Yeah, Bogaerts I think would be my call as well. He's going around 225, so that gives you an idea of like where the cap is for cost on Kim. Jose Caballero, who looks like an actual utility guy, was going earlier than Kim. I would expect that to flip.
Yeah. The only caveat I have there is that Caballero is going to steal more bases, and he's going to start the season as the full-time shortstop, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess the shallower your league, maybe you take Caballero and you just say, hey, Caballero's my stealing bases utility guy, and if he proves to not be worth that, then I'll have choices.
Yeah, that's a little more of a categorical ripcord situation. Just underweight on steals, need to make up some ground. Hope there's enough playing time early with Volpe coming off surgery. Where it's like
categorical ripcord. I'm in trouble. I need steals.
I played that game with saves, and I think I'm going to be punished by the room for my decisions. We'll see how bad it actually is. The other name that goes in that range from a fantasy perspective is just looking at Colson Montgomery. He goes the earliest of the names we've mentioned. I think he's a really hard player to figure out. I've said this for a long time. The injuries in the upper levels of the minor leagues cloud the performance to the point where I don't think the back of the baseball card or the Fangraphs page can give you an accurate story as to what he brings to the table. But then he comes up and has this massive power heater over 71 games, pops 21 homers, and you're kind of like, wait, was I right to have liked Colson Montgomery 2+ years ago as one of the best prospects in that organization, one of the better prospects in baseball? So I'm really knotted up over how I feel about Montgomery coming off of the half-season debut he just put together for the White Sox, but he's not that expensive for a player that we did like a lot at a previous phase of his career.
Right, and we I think we brought him up a couple times being like, hey, it's not as bad as you think in Chicago. Like, it's not as bad as, and now I'm kind of actually flipped now. So after all these years of, saying Colson Montgomery is not as bad as you think, and then he comes up and he does great, I should be taking a victory lap. But now I'm like, Dude is projected for a 299 OBP in the Chicago White Sox lineup. I'm taking Ha-seong Kim unless there's a real categorical need again, home runs versus stolen bases or whatever, because Ha-seong Kim's going to have like a 330, 340 OBP in the Braves lineup, And, how long can you put a guy with a 300, sub 300 OBP near the top of your lineup in Chicago? I guess they can do it while they're rebuilding. But even then, what kind of runs an RBI? So like the everything other than homers is going to be sneaky bad for Colson Montgomery. So I'm glad that this happened, and he showed he's a major leaguer. He's got the bat speed of a major leaguer. He's going to hit for power. But, people are also right to question, what is the defense going to look like? He's pretty big. How healthy is he going to be? What are the plate skills like? What is the batting average and OBP going to look like? Those things are all still true.
Yeah, the categorical imbalance there is tough. I think it's easy enough to just say more likely than not in a roto league for 2026, you can just pass on them. If you're wrong, someone gets a little value, gets a surplus in power, and ends up being fine. But it's probably not the kind of thing you're going to be kicking yourself for, because it's not obvious. As far as flagging him as a sleeper or an undervalued player, I think it's actually a pretty tough call to make. So there's plenty of other interesting things you can do with picks around that exact same time. There's plenty of boring things you can do that are probably very safe projection-wise, where you can get a $10 or $12 player instead. You can get Xander. You can get Brian Reynolds in the outfield. You can get Elliot Ramos, right? There's all sorts of ways that you can kind of manipulate a pick in that.
I embraced the boring
range
a little in my first draft. I thought, there was, especially at this point in the offseason, to be reaching for, prospects or people who haven't played in the big leagues or this hot young pitcher or whatever it is, like there's 2 more months. There's acquisitions left. They could be pushed down the depth chart. They could acquire a first closer. They could, you know what I mean? Like they could push that hot pitcher who's in the 5th slot right now down to 7th with 2 more guys they pick up. You know what I mean? So I just really favored in the earlier drafts. I just really favored guys with established track records that had established roles, and just was a pretty boring draft, but I like it. So
I just made a decision that I'm curious to get some feedback on in real time. I was looking at Brian Reynolds versus Elliot Ramos, and I would assume dollar values and projections still favor Reynolds coming off of a slight down year. I didn't want to do that. I went with the guy that I think is a better player. I think Elliot Ramos did some interesting things last year, knocked the K rate down to 22%, popped to 20 homers again. Playing more and hitting 1 less homer is a little bit disappointing, but to me, it kind of showed that the big step forward in 2024 was mostly real. And I think he's a big part of that lineup again this year. I don't really see a lot of threats to his playing time. I mean, do you see a situation like you described in San Francisco where Ramos would be a semi-regular this year? Because I don't really think that's the outcome.
Yeah, I faced that same dilemma in my draft. I got neither in the end, but
might be the right call. You never know.
I like that Ramos still runs a little bit. I like that Ron Washington is there, because the things that make Ramos at all risky are his base running and his defense. But with Eldridge and Devers and Gerard Encarnacion all on this roster for now, DH is not open. And I think some part of hiring Ron Washington is, hey, can you help us make Devers into a good first baseman? Can you help us make Elliot Ramos into just a decent corner outfielder? Like, we need a little help, not necessarily up the middle as much, everywhere, really, but we need some help defensively. And I just don't think that those things are at the point where it's a crisis. And Ramos is one of the very few players who's in his peak age range that just needs to play every day. And he's a right-hander, so he's not a platoon risk. I don't see him as very risky. I see Reynolds as fairly risky because he changed some of his swing aspects to go for power. It cost him strikeout rate. He's a slightly different player than he was in the past, and he stopped running. So he's not going to give you... He used to be a guy that, if the average line had 10 stolen bases in it and a 260 average and 20 homers or whatever it was, he would just basically give you all of that. And I think he's a risk next year to just be below everything on all those things. 240 with 18 homers and 5 stolen bases. I mean, that's what he did last year, and he seemed to have earned most of what he did last year.
Yeah, wrong side of 30, K rate went up, did basically the exact opposite thing Ramos did in the swing and miss department, and given the age difference, I thought Ramos made a lot more sense. The other factor here, and maybe the Pirates can find a way to tweak that lineup some more in the next 3 months to make it a lot more interesting, but the Pirates were dead last in runs scored last year. 583 runs scored as a team. Giants pretty much close to league average. They were 17th at 705. The supporting cast matters when you're making decisions like that. If you think playing time risk is RBI. Negligible, yeah, just the quality of the team around the player is going to make the difference. Maybe you get 20 more runs and RBIs combined from Ramos, and that will actually matter in the end when you're trying to come out on top in a roto league. All of those counting stats will matter in a big way.
Yeah, speaking of the Giants, they add Adrian Hauser on a 2-year, $22 million deal. And I think they're a sneaky, fascinating team, the Giants, this year. I mean, they do the big thing that they did was get Tony Vitello. And I'm working on a piece right now with Andrew Baggerly about the idea of signing in San Francisco on a pillow contract as a starter, and the idea that you're throwing to Patrick Bailey, you're throwing to that stadium. You know what it does, though? What's weird for me is it makes your ERA better. And I just wrote a whole piece about how teams don't care about ERA. You think that a team can't look at a pitcher that pitches in San Francisco and has a good ERA for 1 year and say, I wonder how much was the park, and strip that out. And I wonder how much was Patrick Bailey, and strip that out. Yes, they can do that because we have public-facing numbers that do that, like DRA over at Baseball Perspectives accounts for the umpire, the weather, the park, the catcher, all of these things, the quality of the opponent. And you can strip all that out and you look at DRA. One thing that was interesting, though, and we're going to have a piece on this, is that some of the people that come and pitch in San Francisco improve by DRA as well. And so there's a question of, is that psychological? Is that is there a game calling aspect that we're not getting everything? So there's some question of that. Anyway, do I think that Adrian Hauser will be really good next year? Not really. He did have the best velo of his career last year, and he switched from sort of a baby sweeper over to more of a gyro slider, like a harder cutterish slider. Stuff Plus still kind of yawned.
Yeah, the command's good. The command's always been pretty good for Adrian Hauser.
The sinker is his best pitch,
a lot of seasons with a 4 ERA and a bad whip. For a low strikeout rate guy, I would expect something else to look good that I'm looking at in the profile. I can't see it. I can't figure out what it was that led the Giants to say, yeah, let's go for the second year. Let's go $22 million.
Why the second year?
The second year is weird. Like, there had to be another bidder. There had to be other teams interested in giving him a second year if the Giants, or at least if the Giants were willing to do it. Someone had to be pushing him on dollars or something. But I can't figure out what the main attraction is here. I think he's a command guy that might chew up a lot of innings. That's about it.
I think, that might just be it. And I think that it's an okay idea because they actually, of all the teams out there, they actually needed that. I mean, on Fangraphs, Hauser's their third SP right now. I think on quality, you go Webb, Ray, Rupp, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you realize, oh, wow, they just have a group. And there's guys I like better in the group. Trevor McDonald is actually kind of interesting. He's like, he took his resume, his arsenal, and kind of like, winnowed it down to just mostly sinker slider. And he's got a really good sinker. And so, I think the upside is very limited, but, in terms of like keeping the ball on the ground, and like he could be Hauser this year, but he could be Hauser, whereas Hauser is probably going to be Hauser, right? So you kind of have Hauser McDonald as a spot, and then you really want Birdsong, Tang, Wisenhunt, or Tidwell. You want somebody to step forward and be better than that. Or I think they're still in the market for another starter because I think you want Hauser to be your 5.
I think
And you
that's
want
ideal.
McDonald
in
and all those guys to be your 6 through 10, you know?
Yeah. I wonder if they just see a little versatility there, though, too, where if some of the younger guys step up and look really good, if they think, we're giving Hauser the same deal the Phillies just gave Brad Keller today, and the same deal that we talked about earlier with Luke Weaver. 2 for 22 seems like the going rate for either a recently converted reliever having a little bit of success, or even maybe a little more success in the case of Weaver, or a back-end starter. And if you think Hauser throws hard enough, and if he were to shorten up his arsenal, he could be an interesting 7th inning guy, then maybe that's the year 2. Like, maybe that's the plan in here, too. You have options. Maybe that's what it comes down to, is the dreaded F word, the flexibility that someone like Adrian Hauser gives you.
He was 95 plus last year, so they're, you could think in the Pens at 96 plus. And is that better than like a Spencer Bivens, next year or whatever? Like, so yeah, I don't hate it as a thing. I do think I agree with you the second, and maybe what it does is maybe it frees up a Birdsong to trade him. Maybe you've been working with Birdsong so long, you're just like, I think this is going to be a reliever, and we haven't figured out any. We've tried everything. We've tried like 3 or 4 different things with Birdsong in terms of we've moved him on the rubber, we've changed his mechanics, we've changed his arsenal, and he still can't find the plate. Maybe we trade him to the Rays because the Rays love players like Birdsong, and we get Brandon Lau back, and we spent the $11 million on Hauser to free up Birdsong to get Brandon Lau and turn Casey Schmidt into a super utility guy.
I feel like everything we talk about now with off-season moves is it takes 3 moves to make one. It's like,
yeah, right.
Because it's just gridlock all over the place. We had a lot of Royals talk on the show Monday. We did not discuss the 5-year extension that Maikel Garcia agreed to, coming off of a big year a season ago as a club option for a 6th year as well. It's a guarantee of $57.5 million, could get up to like $85 million with the option and some escalators. Feels, a little bit team friendly, but given the path that Garcia took to last season, I don't think it's a slam dunk, awesome team friendly deal. It could backfire. We've seen the range. I think we've seen high end and low end, like the reasonable outcomes from Garcia in each of the last 2 seasons. And more likely than not, I think what we get in 26 and 27 probably splits the difference and hews a little more toward the good side, because even when things didn't go well in 2024, there were underlying things, and I admit to having given up on them a little bit, that were still okay, right? A 42.8% hard hit rate in a down year, that's really good. 37 for 39 is a base stealer, elite in terms of base running ability in that regard. Did a really nice job, I think, defensively. So, like, there's a good floor there. More likely than not, this does work out fine for the Royals. It's just the profile has been wobbly to this point. Do you think it levels off a bit for Garcia?
Yeah, there's something about his swing, something about I don't trust the power. Right? I mean, the max EVs are all right. The hard hit rates are great, and that's why we've loved him on this show. But there was really no power until last year. And so if the power regresses, and that's what the projections say he will, then he could be just an average bat, basically, that is floated a little bit much by defense. And that's not something that on the open market gets a lot of money. So maybe that's the thinking for his representation, right? Is, hey, what if he's just an average bat that's defense first? What kind of money would he make on the open market? Maybe we give up some of that for financial security, right? And from the Royal side, you say, what if he does keep the power? What if he adds power? Like we like this and this and this, and his age at 25, and we think maybe he could grow into, the next 2 years, grow into a peak season where he's, a sneaky 30-30 candidate or something, right? Like we want to think of that as a possibility. So lock him in. And the worst case scenario, we have a league average guy, and best case scenario, we have like a Ketel Marte deal where we're like, wow, we're paying $50 million for a guy who, does everything. That's in there.
Yeah, I think that's definitely in there. I mean, I just think I look at the Royals and what they've been doing really now for about 3 years. They've at least become more interesting in terms of the way they're operating. It's still a small market. They're still going to have to try and get by with some team friendly sort of extensions like this, but I like some of the chances they've been taking. If I'm a Royals fan, I can feel good about the process, and I don't know at how many points I felt good about the process looking at the Royals over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I'm more hopeful for sure. Although the Reagans for Duran deal,
That's not going to happen. The Royals balked at that. Come on, if we think
wouldn't
it's silly,
have heard
they
about
think
it
it's silly.
unless it happened, right?
Yeah, it was just kind of like the initial back and forth, I think, is what we were getting from that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna revise Maikel Garcia's home run potential down a little bit. I'm looking at 46th percentile bat speed. So, but I do think a 20-30 season, he got pretty close last year. That could be in the cards. So, I like the deal. I can understand it from his side too. I mean, his side. And Rogers is reporting it could be as much as 85 million. So it could be one of those ones where the escalators are pretty enticing.
Also, not fair on my part to say I didn't believe in their process for most of the last 20 years. They went to back-to-back World Series and could have won both if not for an incredible postseason from Madison Bumgarner. They had some stuff working 10 years ago. It was just that kind of gap from those two runs into the last couple seasons. That's where things looked like they had really fallen by the wayside.
The Royals and Pirates, the Ray Searage Pirates, kind of, I think that they show you what a small market can do if they find an edge, they find a thing that they can do well, and they do it really well, and then they don't iterate. They don't come up with a new edge. They don't continue to push. They say, oh, hey, we figured this cool thing out. And they keep doing that, and they don't try the next thing. The Rays are a little bit more example. I think the Brewers too, of iterating. Whenever you want to say, oh, this is a Rays player, and I've even said that on this podcast today. But whenever you want to say that about the Brewers, I think that you've said different. If you keep in mind who you think of as a Brewers player, prototypical Brewers player or Rays player, there's a couple different players in there. Think about Yandy Diaz. That's what they were doing for a while. And I guess they still have that. And Junior Caminero is Yandy-like in some ways, right?
In some ways, but yeah, that's sort of when you hit the grand slam in development or in scouting, that's that sort of outcome. That's Junior Caminero. I mean, that was a trade in that particular instance. But for
with
the
same
Brewers,
team.
that might be right. That might be in the Brewers' case right now. It might be someone like Jesus Mate, or more accurately on the big league roster, it's Jackson Churio. Sometimes you hit on guys
but
like
I
that
also
too.
think of Caleb Durbin.
Yeah, you think of Durbin,
Bryce Turang, the small guys. You
think of a different sort of player type on top of that. I think when you have multiple paths like that, that's how you have that sustained thing where it's year over year you're exceeding expectations. When you find something that's a little more temporary, a little smaller, that's where you get those runs where you go to back-to-back World Series and win one like Kansas City. And maybe those Pirates teams around that same era are underrated, right? And they lost in a one-game wild card in back-to-back years. If they win either one of those games, that could have been the year where they heated up and just went on a run. You never know, right? So that's just kind of the structure of the playoffs at that time were pretty unfortunate. If you had a good enough team to get there and just got bounced in that one game, it's a really tough break because the what could have been scenarios are fun to dream on.
I like what the Nationals are doing. The Nationals signed Foster Griffin to a $5.5 million deal. But I also like the 1-for-1 trade. There's an excellent Keith Law analysis of the prospect for prospect trade that they made. And I don't have the names. There it is. Thank you, Rundown. Jake Bennett for Luis Perales. What I gather from Keith's piece, and I don't want to take words out of his mouth or steer you away from reading it, was just that Jake Bennett is a crafty, high floor, ready to start, would have given the Nationals maybe 15 to 20 starts this year, lefty, with command, and that Luis Perales is a guy who can touch 100, has a great changeup and might be developing breaking balls, but is wild and needs a little time. That seems like an excellent idea for the Nationals. Get the guy with the higher ceiling rather than someone who could be as good as Brad Lord this year, or maybe a tiny bit better than Brad Lord. It's not really going to do you much good. Foster Griffin, I think, is on the other side is oh, well, we just traded away somebody that could have been Foster Griffin. Instead, we spend $5.5 million, get a lefty who has demonstrated command. He didn't demonstrate at the major league level before, but he has had a K-BB over 20 in 2 straight Japanese seasons. Foster Griffin has added a splitter and upped his cutter usage in Japan. He still only sits 91, but that wasn't going to be Jake Bennett's strength either. And you hope that you create a trade asset. I think. I think that's what you're doing in Washington. I don't think you're necessarily building towards a wild card race. So you're hoping that you trade Foster Griffin at the deadline for something that maybe helps your pen next year or whatever it is.
Yeah, could be some teams interested in him to chew up some innings in the second half if the first half goes well. And it does feel like the Nats are still another year or two away, as we've talked about before. Paul Taboni sort of remaking the org to his liking could delay things a little bit off the previous timetable, but there were concerns about that team not quite getting there with the core as Mike Rizzo had built it, too. So a lot of work to still be done. Josh Bell, former National, goes to Minnesota on a 1-year deal. Anybody losing playing time with Bell going there? Because I think in really deep leagues, Josh Bell was a little bit underrated at times last year. My expectation is that he just plays a lot, though. So unless you saw 500-plus plate appearances kind of sitting there up for grabs, there may be someone else we like that loses a little bit with Bell going to Minnesota.
I mean, they've got Julian is, I don't know what the deal is. And Cody Clemens had this big bat speed increase. I was talking to somebody about that, and they said that they asked him about it, and he said, I don't know.
I don't know. Was he playing like he didn't know, or did he really not know?
He's, they kind of, I think together were like, well, it was the most plate appearances you ever had. Like you really, kind of settled in. Well, anyway, the reason I bring up Cody Clemens is he's a lefty, and Josh Bell has been he's a switch hitter by name only. Is there like an acronym we can make up for this? I feel like my inner Nick Pollock is like
only. A
swino. He's a swino. In name only. With an in name only, you can make swino.
Yeah, that's true.
But he's been really to the point where you pretty much only want to bat him lefty. So there's a little bit of redundancy there. But you also just wonder, like, Julian's star has fallen so far. And I can't say that it's wrong because he's been 20% worse than league average of the stick the last 2 years and hasn't added any defensive value. So I get it. But in his first year, Julian put up 2.7 WAR in 408 plate appearances. He's only 26, and he was once thought of as a pretty bright star. I don't know. I could see the case for also not signing Josh Bell and just saying, hey, Julian and Clemens and maybe Larnach, why don't you guys all check out first base and see who wins?
Yeah, I think it can make some problems for us if everyone stays healthy. Because last month, a report from Aaron Gleeman and Dan Hayes was that, according to Derek Falvey, the president of baseball operations, Clemens was in line to be the team's primary first baseman.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So if Bell's the DH and Clemens is the first baseman, let's assume truth here, which is never safe, but let's assume truth and say, okay, Bell's the DH. That means Larnach has to play in the outfield. Okay, so that means Larnach's going to go play left field and platoon
and he's not that
with
great
Austin
of a
Martin.
Defender, and that means
Right.
Austin Martin's not playing as much. I will say that
might be okay, though.
it might be okay. I will say that there's a really big difference between Steamer and Oopsie offensive projections in this outfield. Oopsie loves Outman. Steamer loves Martin. I would have been okay with putting those two out there and saying, hey, there's like the refined skills contact play, Martin. And then there's the bat speed, hit all sorts of power in Outman. And you guys duke it out. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm being too this is kind of a rebuildy team, and I just want to put as many pieces out there and see who wins out. That's kind of how I was looking at this Twins roster. So I took Outman as my 10th OF in my draft and hold just now because I thought, hey, there's a road for him. The road's a little bit harder with Josh Bell on this team, I think, because of what you just outlined, that Larnach goes to the outfield a little bit more often.
Yeah, the trickle down, I think, is where you see the most pain right now as far as who is actually going to lose that playing time.
But Outman is also the backup center fielder. I don't think they start the center season with Walker Jenkins.
Well, that's the other variable that shakes up the outfield mix is how soon is Walker Jenkins a part of the equation. That could be
Roden has options.
Quick.
Walker Jenkins is young. I think they're in the minors.
Barring a very good spring, or do you think it doesn't even matter?
I think it would have to be a very good spring plus injury because you want to see what you have in Austin Martin, and Outman's out of options.
Yeah. Outman to me seems more like a nothing else we thought we liked better was working. We believe he's at least a big league center fielder off the bench. So we start the year with him. And then we make our adjustment later when something forces our hand. That's sort of what it feels like for Outman, but some other team might be interested for those reasons too. So got a little more crowded in Minnesota with Josh Bell, even though the trickle down ends up messing with the outfield. Last thing for today, you said you wrapped up that draft and hold. 50 rounds in the books. What did you learn from your first draft of this year? Did you find any sort of roster construction problems or issues in the player pool that you maybe had thought about, but you kind of like confirmed that they were actually as bad or worse than you feared?
In terms of, I saw a graph that was showing that catchers and relievers were going up in ADP as a group. And I'm like, hey, that's draft and hold season. You need to have your two starting catchers in these 15-team draft and holds, and you need to have a reliever that has a job. So there's always the rising ADP, and we joked that I got Kate Smith in the 4th in the Arizona Fall League, and so I wasn't able to. Of course, I wasn't able to redo that again, and. I just went with Josh Hader in the 4th. So the quality of my reliever is going to get worse, but I guess I'm going to get a reliever in the 4th. If you don't get a reliever in the 4th, you end up like Derek VanRiper did.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm still here. It's not.
But who's your first closer? You don't even have one yet.
Griffin Jax in the 13th round.
I love it. I love it.
I've tried some stuff in draft and holds that hasn't always worked, but it hasn't failed miserably either. I think where it can fall short is, for anyone who doesn't know, the NFBC's draft and hold leagues, 50 rounds. It snakes. You draft all your players now, no in-season pickups. What you have is what you have. And there's an overall component. All the leagues are playing against each other. If you have an imbalanced roster, you knock yourself out of contention for the overall, right? If you're really deficient in a category, it's very hard to be competitive in that overall. If you're deficient in 2 categories, you are absolutely not winning the overall, right? It's just not going to happen. I think in years past, I've been pretty aggressive with closers. I've been part of the problem. I've wanted 2 in the first 6 or 7 rounds, like 2 out of the circle of trust. I've done that in the past. Obviously, I haven't won the overall. Have won some individual leagues, but haven't crushed every individual league. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Closers break like any other pitcher. Right. Sometimes they lose their jobs unexpectedly, like Mason Miller last year, getting traded into a situation where he wasn't the closer anymore. So you get the high shifts and significant shifts in value that are unexpected for those 2 reasons primarily. I think that circle of trust got so small this year. The number of closers I actually wanted, it shrunk to the smallest it's ever been. It's probably like 7 guys instead of 12.
Yeah, I'm not even sure Hader's in my circle of trust because he had a shoulder injury last year, but where I was, I thought he had to be in. Yeah,
he's in mine because it sounds like he's going to have a normal offseason. He went in the middle of the 4th round. I passed on him at the 3-4 turn because I'm at the end position. I'm in the 15th. I took Yordan Alvarez at 45 and Cole Reagans at 46 because I went Tatis and Henderson in 1 and 2.
If Alvarez was out there for my 4th pick, I would not have taken Hader. I just would have said, all right, I'll figure it out later.
I felt like I had a better chance of waiting even just a couple of rounds or longer and still finding saves that I did of finding enough quality starting pitching. This is a very pitching light build. I've made 16 picks, 4 are pitchers, 3 starters, 1 reliever. So I have a lot of pitching that I'm going to have to just load up with in the bottom 2/3 of this draft. This is going to be an unusual build. This is not a do this every time, draft 5 teams and draft them all like this. This is more of an experimental. So what happens if I really push it and I keep loading up these bats that I really
Just
like?
as a reference,
can I identify the pitching enough?
In my first 16 rounds, I had Hader. I got Vest over Jackson the 13th, which I wish I had Jax over Vest. I mean, that was pre-Jansen, you know. And then I had Christopher Sanchez, Jacob Mizorowski, Luis Castillo, Edward Cabrera, and Aaron Nola. So I had 5 starting pitchers and 2 relievers. I was just thinking, I really want to invest in, you know, we were talking to JH in the group chat, and we were talking about how, you know, taking healthy guys who have roles that might be better than thinking about upside too much, you know? And so I found that those pitchers were undervalued. And, you know, my final pitchers are John Means is my 14th starting pitcher. You know, Ryan Bergert is my 13th. Joe Boyle's my 12th. Jose Barrios is my 11th. I felt like, you know, these are all guys that are 5th or 6th starters, you know, and hopefully what I'm going to give myself is options every week, healthy options that can pitch. So I think sometimes, you know, one of the guys that was brought up was Matthew Liberatore. And I took Liberatore in the 30th round, and I took him over Mick Abel, and I took him over Rhett Lauder, and I took him over Max Scherzer or Spencer Arrighetti. You know, some of these guys I like. Jacob Latz. I love Jacob Latz. But you know why I took Matthew Liberatore? He's probably their starting pitcher. Their first day. Their ace in St. Louis. I think, you know, I want to take that. Even if I don't think he's a great pitcher overall, I will take role, you know, and assured role over a lot of things. So I think the high floor is undervalued sometimes, and you just have to figure out your reliever strategy. The other things that I learned was that third base is pretty tough. You know, the corner infield is pretty tough. My corner infielders are Steer, Cassis, Hoskins, and Condon on the first base side. I think that's a bit of a pain point. I just hope to get 4 guys to produce 1. Because my corner infielder is going to be Austin Riley, Maikel Garcia, with Javier Sanoa and IKF backing them up. So my corner infield is tough. It's not my favorite part of my build, but there's a lot of upside there. There could be 3 starters there. That's all I need. And the rest of my team is killer. Another thing that I learned is if you get a good enough third catcher, I think you don't need a fourth catcher, because fourth catchers in these leagues are awful. You know, there are some really bad fourth catchers out there. And so Nick Fortes, I could have chosen Nick Fortes, but I had Danny Jansen as my third catcher behind Ryan Jeffers and Sal Perez. And I thought, hey, I didn't invest a huge super high pick. I just stayed out of the bottom, and that buys you another pitcher. Every multi-eligibility guy, every, you know, decent third catcher, those decisions buy you more pitcher slots. So the more you can do that and get multi-eligibility guys. My big multi-eligibility guy that I really kind of liked was Javier Sanoa. I think he's going to add shortstop eligibility and be shortstop, second, third, and outfield eligible. And I think he will be their jack of all trades in Miami. So I don't necessarily think he's great, but he has top 10 hit tool, according to the Driveline hit grades. And, hit tool plus defensive ability plus legs. I don't think that's the player that they're going to leave off the roster.
No, it seems like he does enough things well to carve out a pretty significant role. I think the imbalanced build approach I've taken, the takeaway, the quick one, and I'll dig more into this on future episodes as I see how it plays out. I think there's a pretty bad pocket of pitchers between pick 200 and 300 by ADP. Like it seems like that group is less intriguing to me than usual, or the question marks are bigger question marks for health reasons. So I'm looking at that and I'm really saying, maybe this is not ideal this year, even though in other years I would have gone hog wild in this range with a bunch of pitchers I liked.
What
I feel like I
rounds
could
are
wait
those?
it out even longer. So this would be more like rounds 12, after round 12, like round 14, 15, 16. I've liked the bats a lot better than the pitchers for the most part, where I've been sitting.
I went bats there. The only one I got was, I got Edward Cabrera in 13, who I like probably a little better than you.
Yeah, you do. You do. I mean, based on history.
I got Aaron Nola there, which is my boring buy floor. Sometimes if you, all else being equal, like buy floor. And then my hitters in that round were Steer, Lowe, Simeon, Jeffers, and Jung-Hoo Lee, like all starters for me. I think that is a decent place to go for hitters. But you can't also go for hitters there after going for hitters the whole way through.
Yeah. I'm not going to have the disgusting depth problem you're describing on hitters. I'm going to have it more on pitching. Like, do these guys have jobs? Are they healthy? Are they up? Or, all of those questions. So I'm curious to see what happens here, because I did not go in with this plan.
I'm coming. Give me a second. Oh, sorry.
That was on.
That was not the mute.
All right. Eno has to go. So thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this together. We got another episode coming up next week on Monday. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels.
Time for a recital. Let's go.